Often, tragedies are remembered. However, in the case of the Manitoba riverboats, pretty much none of the tragedies were remembered, which is a shame. However, they're often forgotten in general, so it's not really a surprise. This is the case for one riverboat in particular, which survived an event which should have sunk it, but it never made a comeback. This is the history and demise of the SS Premier. Built for the Reed and Tate Fishing Company, the Premier was launched before a large crowd at Selkirk, Manitoba on May 6, 1896. She was 126 feet long, 22 feet 9 inches wide, and had a draft of 8 feet and 9 inches. She was clad with iron up to 6 inches above the waterline, and that would become an important factor later on, and had a gross tonnage of 414 tons. She featured electric lighting, a Scotch-clad boiler, 2 firefighting pumps, one manual and one was steam-powered, a 22-foot-long compartment lifeboat with room for 22 people, and had a wind lifeboat with room for 20, as well as 85 cork life jackets. This was before you had to have room in lifeboats for all your passengers. Premier was captained by Captain T.E. Pollock. She was certified for 75 passengers, and she was soon conducting excursion trips from Winnipeg to points along the Red River to destinations around Lake Winnipeg, as well as fishing operations. Ports of call included Horseshoe Island near Grand Rapids, Gull Harbor, Bull's Head, Snake Island, and George Island. A 3-day round trip from West Selkirk to Horseshoe Island cost $10 for adults and $5 for children. Meals included. By 1900, the vessel had been sold and was now owned by the Dominion Fishing Company Limited, managed by William Robertson. On August 3, 1908, the vessel departed Selkirk laden with mixed cargo and empty fish boxes, bound for northern ports. 2 days later, she docked at Warren's Landing and loaded up with fish and an entire winter consignment worth of furs from the Hudson's Bay Company post at Cross Lake. 19 passengers were also on board, in addition to the crew, led by Captain John Stevens and engineer C.W. Cornish. On August 6, at sometime between midnight and 12:50 a.m., a fire started aboard the vessel. By 2 a.m., an intense flame had burned the ship to below its waterline, kept afloat only by her outer iron cladding. 2 crewmen, assistant ship's cook Nord Smith and ship's cook Gus Wheel, perished in the blaze, along with 6 passengers: Elmer Montgomery Jones, Ulster Edward Overton, Leonard Bartlett Fry, Miss Catherine Closier, W. Olson of Spider Island, and teacher Miss Mary Elizabeth Povah. I'm sorry, Povah, I think. I'm sorry if I said that wrong. The remains were found where they slept, not having warning nor the opportunity to attempt to escape the fire. The heat of the fire was so intense that some of the victims could only be identified by positions of their berths in the vessel. And this was the day before DNA sampling was taken. The other 38 occupants managed to get to safety with varying injuries, although I'd assume it's the lifeboats, but honestly it doesn't say, so I'm not too sure. The entire cargo was destroyed. No effort was made to extinguish the blaze because the crew got wholly unaware. The crew, along with some locals, focused their efforts on extinguishing the fire, which had spread ashore to the company's docks and freezer plant. The tugboat Idle, which came alongside to aid in the rescue effort, sustained fire damage that forced it to retreat. Royal Northwest Mounted Police, RNWMP, now known as the RCMP, Constable Charles Victor Wood ran into the burning Dominion Fish Company warehouse and extracted a keg of gunpowder stored there. He suffered burns in retrieving it, but it was conceded later that, had the keg exploded, the loss of life could have been much greater. The entire incident cost some $54,000 in damage, and this is a 1908 dollar, so that's a lot more today, including the lost ship valued at $24,000 and $30,000 in damaged infrastructure at Warren's Landing. The lost furs added an estimated 50,000, though the exact value was never known because the bookkeeping records aboard the ship were destroyed. So it's potentially 104,000, maybe more, maybe a bit less, in 1908 dollars in damage. That's a ton of money today. In the following days, Sergeant Smith, Constable Wood, and William Thomas searched the surrounding waters to find the bodies of the 4 victims. The Premier's hull was drained, enabling searchers to locate more bodies, as firefighting efforts had put more water in the vessel. The remains were returned to Selkirk and Winnipeg by Lady of the Lake. The survivors were brought back, and this was, by the way, I just want to say, I did not know this at the time I made the video on the Wolverine, but the survivors and the Premier herself was towed back to Selkirk by the Wolverine. An inquiry was launched by the Federal Wreck Commander OGV Spain and Commissioner Mary A.B. Perry of the RNWMP, now the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. After hearing the testimony of witnesses, the inquiry released its findings on October 12, 1908. 5 days later, they were made public in the No. 2 courtroom at the Winnipeg SC's court. The inquiry included that, although the boat lacked the required certificate covering its electrical lighting, along with an inspection by a certified electrician, both of which were required by law, and both of which were missing, and the watchman at position, which there was no legal requirements, but they were reportedly prone to taking naps on the job. However, these were dismissed as factors contributing to the fire. All crew members were cited for having the proper papers, and alcohol was determined not to have been a factor. However, Captain Stevens and Chief Engineer Cornish were stripped of their certifications, on the grounds that they made no attempt to take charge of the situation, which it sure looks like they didn't. It was also revealed that the crew never engaged in fire or boat preparedness drills. Stevens, though a captain for a dozen years, never commanded a passenger vessel before, nor did he appreciate the burden of the responsibility he held for those in his care. He liked freight, he didn't like passengers. Upon being notified of the blaze, he took time to partially dress and left the vessel ahead of other passengers and crew, all while failing to raise an alarm. However, the inquiry felt that his lack of leadership was an account of shock and paralysis instigated by fear rather than cowardice. Ultimately, the fire was determined to have been caused by a smaller fire that was in the hold a few hours earlier, which had been inadequately extinguished, partially due to the lack of training for the crew to deal with fires. Eventually, it reignited. The lack of preparedness, leadership, and discipline by the crew magnified the problem tenfold. In November 1908, a $60,000 lawsuit was filed by N.F. Hegel at the Portage Prairie while assays unheard. Miss Isber, a nurse aboard the ship, was awarded $4,000 plus costs for her injuries and medical expenses. William Joseph Delaney, a passenger, died 4 years later in July of 1912 of injuries sustained in the disaster. The Premier was scrapped after the incident from what I could find, although I believe some of her still exists to this day. I'll put pictures up if that's the case. The Premier was a nice ship, but she never really achieved a long career like so many others. She was one of many to become victims to fire. Most known Manitoba riverboats don't have a long life, somehow, unlike so many other riverboats worldwide, and like those ones in the museum. But those are stories for another day. And despite the Premier being mostly forgotten, some like me will never forget the Manitoba riverboats and the many tragedies that happened on Manitoba's Red River and on Lake Winnipeg.